car prices are climbing, and the cost of your next ride could be up to $5,000 higher than just a few months ago. From basic sedans to high-end luxury models, every type of vehicle is feeling the squeeze. What's driving these steep increases, and how will this impact your wallet? In today's video, we're unpacking the reasons behind the sharp rise in car prices and what this means for you as a driver or potential buyer. Whether you're looking at a budget-friendly sedan or eyeing a luxury SUV, no one is immune to these price hikes. We'll look at the factors causing this surge, from supply chain issues to tariffs on imports, and how it's affecting everything from car payments to your daily commute. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand not just the why behind the price jump, but also how to navigate these changes in your everyday life. Let's dive in. In an unprecedented move, Trump's administration slapped a 25% tariff on all imports from Mexico and Canada. At the same time, China found itself caught in the crossfire, with tariffs escalating from 10 to 20%. These tariffs affect everything from automobiles, electronics, and clothing to citrus fruits and coffee. The hope behind these tariffs was that the U.S. would benefit from a more balanced trade relationship, one where its partners were forced to make concessions in order to preserve trade relations. However, the reality has been far less rosy. For example, Mexico exports a significant amount of products to the U.S. This includes everything from cars to agriculture products like avocados and tomatoes. With a 25% tariff on these goods, the cost of these imports has skyrocketed. Prices on groceries, gasoline, and even car prices have spiked, consequently leading to inflation. American consumers feel the burden immediately, with prices on common items such as produce or automobiles growing unaffordable. The middle class and low-income families are being hit the hardest by these increases. Meanwhile, Canada has its own set of issues with U.S. tariffs. The Canadian government was forced to retaliate against the U.S. tariff move, imposing their own levies on $125 billion worth of U.S. goods. These tariffs have affected a vast array of U.S. exports, from petroleum to agricultural products, vehicles, and machinery. Canada's retaliatory tariffs were direct and swift, punishing U.S. businesses in areas where they were most vulnerable. Canada's energy exports to the U.S. have also been severely impacted by the tariffs. With oil prices and energy costs rising due to Canadian tariffs, American companies in the energy sector are facing massive cost increases. This shift has the potential to severely hurt U.S. refineries. With Canadian oil making up nearly 50% of the crude oil imported to the USB, the increase in these costs will eventually trickle down to U.S. consumers, especially when it comes to the price at the pump. Canada's response was swift and far-reaching. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't hesitate to match Trump's tariffs with retaliatory measures of his own. Canada introduced tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, including agricultural products, steel, and aluminum. The government was also preparing for the second wave of retaliatory tariffs, totaling up to $125 billion. Trudeau emphasized that these tariffs were not just about protecting Canadian interests, but a clear signal that Canada was willing to defend its sovereignty against unfair trade practices. The Canadian retaliation didn't stop there. Trudeau accused Trump of attempting to undermine the economic stability of Canada in an effort to exert control over its neighbor to the north. He went as far as to suggest that Trump's ultimate plan might be to weaken Canada's economy to a point where it could eventually be annexed into the U.S. This accusation might seem extreme, but it highlights the political and economic undercurrent of these tariffs. The U.S. and Canada have long shared a close relationship, but the impact of these tariffs has tested the limits of that relationship. As tensions flared, there were growing concerns about the future of North American trade. Canada, for its part, wasn't content to remain the victim of Trump's economic warfare. Trudeau continued to ramp up his rhetoric, declaring that Canada was prepared for a prolonged economic conflict if necessary. The question arose, how long could these two nations continue to feud? As expected, Wall Street felt the immediate shockwaves of this trade war. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq both saw major losses as soon as Trump's tariffs were announced. Companies reliant on international trade began facing severe supply chain disruptions, with the automotive industry suffering the most. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler reported multi-billion-dollar losses, due to tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports. The automotive industry in particular felt the impact. The U.S. is heavily reliant on Mexican factories to build components for vehicles, and the cost of these materials has increased due to the tariffs. These changes are disrupting the automotive manufacturing process, leading to production delays and a rise in the cost of new cars. Consumers are now forced to pay higher prices for vehicles, affecting everything from entry-level sedans to luxury models. In some cases, the increase in prices for vehicles is expected to be up to $5,000 per car. Beyond the automotive industry, retail prices on goods from clothing to electronics have seen a rise as well. Popular products such as iPhones, laptops, and television sets are subject to higher import taxes, leading to price hikes that American consumers will feel. Retailers like Walmart, Target, and Best Buy are warning consumers to prepare for rising costs, especially on imported products. The consumer electronics sector, which thrives on imported goods, is among the hardest hit by these tariffs. While the U.S. is directly affected by these tariffs, the global consequences cannot be ignored. China, too, has come under pressure as part of this trade war, with tariffs escalating from 10 to 20%. This increase has harmed both U.S. exports to China and Chinese imports into the U.S., with China holding vast amounts of U.S. debt. This trade conflict creates a serious vulnerability in the U.S. economy. The larger question is, what will China's response be? In a market where China is the second largest economy, retaliatory tariffs could potentially have a much more devastating impact on the U.S. economy. The U.S. is already facing significant challenges in its attempts to wean itself off of cheap Chinese goods, which it imports in bulk. The Chinese government has stated that it will not back down from its own tariffs, and it has already taken action by slapping tariffs on American products, from soybeans to automobiles. The effects of these counter tariffs could push the global economy into a downward spiral, with businesses everywhere facing rising costs and unemployment rates on the rise in both countries. In fact, global supply chains are already feeling the squeeze. Companies that rely on cheap labor in China and low-cost materials from Mexico are now rethinking their manufacturing strategies. The potential for a restructuring of the global economy is becoming more likely. Will companies continue to rely on low-cost overseas production, or will they return manufacturing to the US or Canada in an attempt to weather the storm? We could be at the beginning of a seismic shift in the global economy. As the effects of this trade war reverberate through the economy, Americans are already starting to feel the consequences. Higher prices are everywhere. At the grocery store, avocados, tomatoes, citrus fruits, and other essential items from Mexico are now more expensive than ever before. American families, already stretched thin by rising costs, are now facing higher prices for everyday staples. For example, a single avocado could rise from $1.5 to $2.5, a small price increase that compounds with every shopping trip. Gasoline prices have surged as well, with the average cost of a gallon now rising significantly in states that depend on Canadian oil. Refineries, too, are facing unprecedented challenges, with higher costs for raw materials pushing the price of gasoline up. Truck drivers, who transport goods across the country, are struggling with the increasing cost of fuel, cutting into their earnings. This has a ripple effect, impacting the cost of everything from shipping goods to public transportation. Job losses are also taking a serious toll. Companies in the steel, automobile, and agriculture industries are already laying off employees due to higher costs brought on by the tariffs. Farmers in particular are being hit hard, with products like soybeans and corn facing devastating price drops due to tariffs imposed by China. Many farmers rely on exports to China, and the rise in tariffs has severely limited their ability to stay competitive in the international market. So, what's the takeaway here? The US-Canada trade conflict has already led to massive financial losses and has disrupted everyday life for millions of Americans. While both sides prepare for further escalation, the impact on consumers is undeniable. Rising prices, job losses, and economic instability are on the horizon. Trump's strategy may have been designed to protect American interests, but as we've seen, the result has been a backlash that has left the American consumer paying the price. As always, we'll be keeping an eye on the situation and will update you with the latest developments. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on the ongoing trade war and other global economic news.
Imported from Canada, along with significant volumes of natural gas and hydroelectric power from Quebec. The stability of this energy supply is essential for everything from powering industries to keeping homes warm during the winter. If trade tensions force Canada to redirect its energy exports to more lucrative markets in Europe or Asia, the US could face a serious energy crisis. Analysts estimate that a disruption in Canadian oil supplies could push domestic energy prices up by 30-70 cents per gallon within a year. The U.S. Energy Information Administration (EIA) warns that even a temporary shortage could reduce industrial output by up to 5%, affecting both production and employment across energy-dependent sectors. For the everyday American, higher energy prices mean more expensive gasoline at the pump and increased heating bills. EIA research suggests that in regions heavily dependent on Canadian oil, households could face an annual cost increase of around $500. This extra burden affects everything from the cost of commuting to the price of goods that rely on energy-intensive production processes. When energy becomes less predictable and more expensive, families must tighten their budgets, affecting their quality of life and overall economic well-being. Chapter 6: Shifting Global Trade Dynamics. Is U.S. dominance on the decline? For decades, the United States has enjoyed a dominant position in global trade. However, recent trends indicate that this dominance may be eroding. Countries like Canada, the EU, Japan, and China are forging new trade alliances and diversifying their markets, leading to a more multipolar global economic landscape. Data from the World Trade Organization shows that global trade has grown by an average of 4% annually over the past decade. Yet, the rise of protectionist measures is beginning to slow this growth. The U.S. has seen its share of international markets decline as traditional allies seek new partnerships. For example, under agreements like CETA, projections suggest that the EU could expand its share of Canadian trade by an additional 32%. What does this mean for the everyday consumer? A decline in U.S. trade dominance can lead to higher prices for imported goods and fewer choices in the market. Studies indicate that such shifts might raise the consumer price index by 1–2%, directly affecting about 20% of consumers in key sectors. Moreover, a slowdown in technological innovation, if American companies lose their competitive edge, could delay the introduction of new products and services, potentially leading to higher costs and fewer advancements that make everyday life more convenient. Chapter 7: The Human and Economic Cost. Impact on workers and consumers beyond the broad economic figures and international policies. It's important to remember that trade wars have real human costs. Thousands of workers in both the auto and agricultural sectors depend on a stable, predictable trade environment. Disruptions can lead to factory closures, job losses, and long-term economic distress. When workers lose their jobs, the effects extend far beyond the individual. Communities can suffer as local businesses close, public services are reduced, and overall quality of life declines. Okun's law shows that a 1% rise in unemployment can correlate with a 2% drop in local economic activity, impacting everything from school funding to healthcare services. For families, this means uncertainty about paying bills, maintaining stable housing, and affording everyday necessities, real-world challenges that underscore the personal toll of international trade disputes. In summary, Canada's proposal of a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles represents more than just an isolated trade measure. It signals a fundamental realignment in global trade dynamics. From the impact on the U.S., auto industry and energy security to the rippling effects on agriculture and everyday consumer prices, the stakes are enormous. The big question remains, will the U.S. adapt its trade policies to stay competitive in a rapidly changing global order? Or will it risk economic isolation as its traditional allies? Build more diversified, resilient trade networks? Only time will tell, But one thing is clear, the choices made today will shape our everyday lives for years to come. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think these changes will affect your day-to-day life? Drop your comments below and join the discussion.